Now let's begin with the main idea question. So in a main idea question, they're trying to test whether you have understood what the passage is primarily concerned with. In other words, if you had to summarize the entire passage to a friend within 30 seconds, what would you say in those 30 seconds, right? That's what the main idea question is all about. So let's look at a main idea question. Which of the following options best summarizes the central idea of the passage? Okay, so this is the main idea question right here. They're talking about the central idea or the principal concepts and so on. That's how they will word this question. Now notice I have hidden or blanked out the answer choices right now because we have to follow our strategy, which is about understanding the task of the question, then locating which particular part of the passage will help us answer it, then anticipating the answer in our own words, and only then finally we would have to eliminate the answer choices. So we do not need to see the answer choices at this time. And on the test day, or while you practice for the test, it's a good idea to cover the to hide the answer choices with the palm of your hand, so you can or with a piece of paper, so you can actually focus on the question until you're done anticipating and you're ready to start eliminating the answer choices. So now let's understand the task. What is the main idea of a passage? So the question wants us to identify an option that conveys what the passage is primarily concerned about. All right. So now when it comes to locating, now to identify the main idea of a passage, you should be able to comprehend the overall context and understand the passage as a whole in its entirety. So for this question type, identifying a specific portion here or here or here is not really possible because the main idea is encompassed in the entirety of the passage. So let's directly skip to the anticipate step. Now the question we're concerned with is what the passage primarily says. Now the passage includes a lot of different details, but it's essentially focused on one particular point. So if you recall our understanding of the passage, you know that the passage tries to show a potential correlation between tidal patterns and seismic tremors, right? All right. And further, the passage cites the research conducted in a particular volcano to explain this, or rather to substantiate or prove that this correlation exists, and that this correlation can in turn act as a warning signal for a volcanic eruption. So this is our understanding of the main idea of the passage. That such a correlation exists between the tidal cycles and the volcanic tremors, and that it could be used as a potential warning signal. And now let's go to the next step, and the final step of eliminating the answer choices. So here I have tried to describe what we anticipated. In other words, we anticipated that the passage tries to show a potential correlation between tidal patterns and seismic tremors, which in turn could act as a warning signal for a volcanic eruption. Further, the passage cites research conducted at a particular volcano, to explain an observation of this correlation. So now let's start eliminating the answer choices. The first one. Observing the patterns of correlation between tidal cycles and seismic tremors could potentially help identify an impending volcanic eruption. Definitely sounds like what we have anticipated, right? So this option seems to be the correct answer, and it says that identifying the correlation between tidal waves and tremors could possibly tell us about a volcanic eruption that's likely to occur. So this does seem very tempting, but don't be too sure yet. Let's look at the other answer choices and make sure we are indeed correct. So choice B. The change in the amplitude of tides between the first quarter and full moon phase not only shows that the gravitational pull affects the Earth's crust, but also shows that tidal forces can trigger seismic tremors. Does the passage show that tidal forces can trigger seismic tremors? In fact, the passage doesn't say this at all. The passage actually says that whether this happens or not is a long-standing question that a lot of research has been done, and they've not been able to prove either way whether tidal forces can or cannot trigger seismic research. No one knows yet, right? So this is not known, and the passage is very clear about it. So B cannot be a correct answer choice. Let's look at C. The studies conducted based on the Ruapehu volcano show that the correlation pattern between tidal cycles and tremors was noticed only during the period of 3 months prior to the eruption of 2007 September. So yes, it is true that the passage does say that this correlation was noticed only during this period of 3 months before the eruption, but it is not the main concern of the passage. The passage does cite this research to show how the correlation patterns and how the warnings, how it could function as a warning signal. But this little data point here, which is which is talked about at a very specific space, right, in a couple of lines here and here, is not the main idea of the passage. So even though C is accurate, it's not the main idea. And this is one way where they'll try to trick you into giving you accurate and factually correct information according to the passage, but it's not the main idea of the passage, or it's not the answer to this particular question. So let's move to choice D. Data collected from the seismic sensors located near the volcano's crater used to prove that seismicity and tidal cycles are correlated. Now again, this data was used to prove that these two are correlated, right? But that's only a minor detail discussed in the passage. It's not the main idea. The main idea is that observing the patterns of correlation between tidal cycles and seismic tremors could potentially help identify an impending volcanic eruption, and therefore A is the correct answer choice. Look at our next question. It's a vocabulary in context question. As used in the line, it is also suggested blah blah blah, paragraph 1. Probe most nearly means. So in this question, we are being asked to identify the meaning of the word probe as used in the context of the particular part of the passage. And that's what makes this question a vocabulary in context question, because you have to identify the meaning of this word, but as used in paragraph 1 in the context in which it is used. So we have now understood the task of the question. Now let's move to the next step, locate. They have told us it's paragraph 1. That makes our life so much easier. So now let's look at paragraph 1. Where is the word probe mentioned? Do a quick visual scan and you will find that the word probe is right here. So now let's understand the context. You usually just have to read the particular sentence or maybe the preceding sentence. Looking at data for this volcano spanning about 12 years, researchers from NASA found that this correlation between the amplitude of seismic tremor and tidal cycles developed only in the 3 months before this eruption. It also suggested that the tides could provide a probe for telling us whether or not a volcano has entered a critical state. The tides could provide a probe for telling us something. So now we have located, let's now try and anticipate what the answer choice could be, what the answer could be. Well, the data from the volcano indicates that there was a correlation between seismic tremors and tidal cycles during the period of these 3 months, right? So it's telling us something. So we know that the tides could provide a probe for telling us, to tell us whether a volcano has entered a critical state. So the word used in the blank should convey the idea, this word probe or whatever word that's used here should convey the idea that the tide could possibly be a means by which we could identify whether a volcano has entered a critical state. So it could be a means for identifying that, or it could be a way to identify, right? Because that's kind of what's the context about, because it is a way to tell us whether something has happened. So it could provide a way of telling us. It could provide a means to tell us something. So let us first anticipate that the meaning is going to be in this. This is the answer choice is going to mean something like this. All right. So again, it's very important not to look at the answer choices until you have anticipated what the answer could be. And now we are ready to start eliminating the answer choices. So let's look at things let's look for a choice which means a means of doing something or a way to do something. Let's look at device. Well, a device is typically something concrete. It's a thing used to achieve a particular aim, but it's usually a thing. It's a very concrete thing, and therefore, a device is probably not the right answer, right? Like your mobile device or something like that. So this is not correct. mechanism. Now this sounds interesting because a mechanism is indeed a method or a means to that we can use to do something, right? Which is very, very similar to what we have identified. So this does sound right, but let's quickly eliminate C and D as well. A choice. Well, a choice is an act of choosing between two or more possibilities, and that's definitely not what's happening here, right? This is actually telling us how, it's a way to tell us something. It's a way of getting something. So choice is not correct. And evidence, well, evidence is something like a proof, right? It's a way of finding out whether something is true or not. So this is definitely not right either. So mechanism is indeed right, and a very important way to cross-check whether you have answered a vocabulary in context question correctly is to plug in or substitute this answer choice right there back into the question. So instead of probe, if we replaced probe with the word mechanism, okay, it also suggested that the tides could provide a mechanism for telling us whether or not a volcano has entered a critical state. Fits perfectly, and therefore mechanism is indeed the correct answer. And now we're going to answer a detail-based question which deals with specifics of certain information that's conveyed in the passage. So here's our question, and as usual, we first have to understand the task that the question wants us to perform. So let's not really look at the answer choices right now. The passage suggests which of the following as the most likely reason for the researchers choosing the Ruapehu volcano to study the correlation between tidal forces and the volcanic eruption. So the question wants us to identify why the researchers chose this particular volcano, the Ruapehu volcano in New Zealand, for their study. And what is their study? To study the correlation between tidal forces and volcanic eruption. So we understand the question, and our next step is to locate the particular part of the passage which will help us answer this very specific, detailed, oriented question. Now, if you remember from our skimming of the passage, the Ruapehu volcano was first encountered in the third paragraph. So there's nothing about it here in the first paragraph or in the second one, but here you have the researchers chose to study the Ruapehu volcano. In part because, okay, they're giving you reasons, so let's note down the reasons. In part because, one, GNS Science, a research institute in New Zealand, has been closely monitoring its activity for years. So that's great. That basically means that this institute has been observing the volcano for a long time, okay? And let's go on to the next reason. The mountain is a popular tourist attraction and home to 2 ski resorts, which makes it necessary for officials to be aware of any warning signs that it might erupt. Okay, so it's a popular tourist attraction, and therefore they have been monitoring it for a while. So the next sentence is, this monitoring provided a long and continuous data set, right? Because there were tourists here, it was a popular tourist spot, they had to do a long and continuous monitoring of the seismic signals to be aware of any warning signs. And this monitoring provided a long and continuous data set for the researchers to study. So they have a long and continuous data set now. And in particular, the team was interested in data from seismic sensors located near the volcano's crater. So they had seismic sensors located near the volcano's crater, and those sensors pick up volcanic tremor, a low-level seismic rumble that provides a persistent signal of activity. All right, so there are lots of reasons for why this volcano was very interesting to the researchers, because there was long and continuous monitoring by that particular institute, right? Because there were tourists and you had to take care of them, and there were seismic sensors located near the volcano's crater that would do the monitoring. Okay, so by the way, this might not be the Ruapehu volcano, okay, this particular image. I just picked a volcano image that had tourists near it. So let's look at the, now let's try and summarize and anticipate what the possible reasons could be in our own words. So first, what are the reasons mentioned in the passage? First, there's been an institute that has been observing the Ruapehu volcano for a long time. Second, a monitoring process has recorded long and continuous data relating to the volcano's activity, which is very useful. And third, the seismic sensors that collect the data are located near the volcano's crater. So these are the three reasons. Notice I have not included the tourists in any anticipation, because that the tourists are there is why this monitoring happened. And therefore, for the researchers who are studying the connection between seismic tremors and tidal cycles, the tourists are not a directly valuable or useful information, because they only care about the data that comes from the monitoring, whether or not tourists were there. So these are the three main reasons that we are anticipating will be the correct answer to this detailed question. And now that we are done with the anticipation step, now we can proceed to eliminate. So the passage suggests which of the following as the most likely reason, and let's start with choice A. Access to 12 years worth of consistent data pertaining to the lunar forces in the region. I don't remember anything about lunar force, do you? Yes, there is no mention regarding the availability of information related to lunar forces in the region. Although, yes, there is information about 12 years worth of data, and this is how they try to trick you, okay? And you will not fall for this trick, because there's another part of this question stem that is not correct. Okay, it's not, whether it's correct or not, it's not provided in the passage. So we cannot use this. So choice A is incorrect. Then let's move on to choice B. The ready availability of extensive historical data related to the volcano's activity. This seems correct because it's right here in our answer choices that we had anticipated, right? There's a monitoring process that has recorded long and continuous data related to the volcano's activity. So there is ready availability of extensive historical data. This is basically a rephrasing of the reasons that we had identified. Perfect. So this sounds like the right answer, but let's just eliminate C and D just to be sure. The precision of the sensors used at Ruapehu to detect the seismic activity from the volcano. Well, yes, sensors were used at Ruapehu to detect the seismic activity, but the passage doesn't say that the sensors used at Ruapehu identify seismic activity so accurately, or that other sensors at other volcanoes weren't so accurate. So there's no conversation about the precision of the sensors here. So C is incorrect. And D, the proximity of the sensors to the volcanic crater, which allows for the feeblest of volcanic activity to be captured. So this is also tempting, but it is, because it's true that the researchers were interested in seismic records, because they record even the most lowest level of seismic rumble. But the researchers were concerned about the data collected from the sensor, and they were not concerned about its proximity. They just wanted to make sure the data was accurate. And for them, what mattered was that the data was, had been collected for many years, and the data was accurate. So proximity is not something that's directly referenced to and as the reason for why they chose that place, even though it's factually correct that the sensors are close to the crater. So D is also incorrect, which leaves us with choice B. So if you plug it back in, it should make sense. The passage suggests which of the following as the likely reason for the researchers choosing this volcano? The ready availability of extensive historical data relating to the volcano's activity. So this directly answers our question, and hence choice B is the answer. So our next question is an inference question, where we have to come to a logical conclusion based on what's given in the passage. So let's take a look at our question. All of the following statements can be inferred to be true according to the passage except. So all of these statements are true except for one statement. In other words, you can expect to have 3 statements which are true and 1 statement which is false, which means for each of these choices, we have to decide whether it's true or false, right? And at the end of it, you're expected to have 3 choices which are true and 1 which is false. So let's make sure we understand this correctly, and you shouldn't get confused. It's not the other way around. It's not all of these are false except for something, in which case it would be the opposite, where you would have 3 false statements and 1 true statement. But that is not what this particular question is asking us to do. So, so now we will proceed to locate from the passage the relevant parts for each option. Option A. Observing signals from tidal patterns is not the only way to predict a volcanic eruption. So it's very important to note words like not and only. They may be small words, but they are very, very important in a sentence. And if you miss them, you might get the whole question wrong. So observing signals from tidal patterns is not the only way to predict a volcanic eruption. So if you go back to the beginning of the passage, they're talking about how signals associated with tidal cycles could potentially provide advanced warning of certain types of volcanic eruptions. So they could provide a warning, they could provide a way to predict the eruption, but nowhere does the passage say that it is the only way to predict a volcanic eruption, and therefore choice A is true. Let's move on to choice B. Sensors placed near the volcano's crater are more likely to register lower levels of activity in the volcano. So where is this covered in the passage? So if you remember from the third paragraph here, the team was interested in data from seismic sensors located near the volcano's crater, and those sensors pick up volcanic tremor. It is a lower level seismic rumble. Okay, so this is given in the passage, and therefore these the sensors near the crater of the volcano can record even the low levels of activity within the volcano. Therefore, this choice is also true. Now, let's move on to choice C. There was no correlation between tidal cycles and seismicity for most of the 12-year period until a few months before the September 2007 eruption. So where is this? It should be pretty easy. Where does the 2007 come in? It comes in once here, and it also comes here. So you kind of have to do a mental, a quick find and, a search, and you can see that when you read this, they found that for most of those 12 years, there was no correlation between tremor and lunar cycles, except the few months before a steam-driven eruption in September 2007. So this is essentially what choice C is telling us, and it's right there in the passage, and therefore C is also true, which means choice D is likely to be false, and that will be our answer. But it's very important to cross-check and make sure we are correct. So let's read choice C. The strong correlation observed between tidal cycles and volcanic tremors 3 months before the eruption is most probably coincidental. Most probably coincidental? Are you kidding me? This entire passage is all about how this correlation it happens just 3 months before the volcanic eruption, and therefore it can be used to predict. Now, if something is random, if these two incidents are random and they can happen independent of each other, then I'm not saying they're random, but if they happen independently, then they're not correlated. So if you go back to the passage where they say the correlation was as strong as 5 sigma, the researchers say, meaning that the probability that the pattern arose by chance is about 1 in 3.5 million. So the likelihood that it was random or coincidental, those are odds are like 1 in 3.5 million. Okay, and that's like a very, 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 very tiny possibility that it could be random. So the strong correlation is not most probably random. It's actually most probably, they are related, they are correlated. It's not just a coincidence, right? So, I've kind of been using random and coincidental interchangeably, but for the purpose of this passage, that's fine. And therefore, this is false. This is not coincidental. They are so sure that this is, this is predictive and indicative. So this is false. And therefore, choice D is our answer to this inference question. And now we come to a tone question. Tone questions ask you to identify the particular feeling or attitude the author displays towards a certain subject. So let's look at our tone question. the author's attitude towards something. So you can directly see that this is a tone question. So we have understood that this is a tone question, and we have been given some feelings or attitudes, and we have to choose which is the correct attitude towards a particular behavior. So again, now that we have understood the question, let's not start looking at the answer choices right away, but let us begin to let's begin to anticipate what exactly we're going to do after we locate the correct responses. So now we have to understand the author's attitude towards tidal cycles being a strong indicator. Remember, adjectives, adverbs, watch out. Tidal cycles being a strong indicator of certain types of volcanic activity can be best described as. So we have to find out how this particular author feels about tidal cycles being a strong indicator of certain types of volcanic activity. So right at the beginning of the passage, if you take a look, signals associated with tidal cycles could potentially provide advanced warning. So the author kind of believes that this is possible. And as you go toward the end of the passage, he actually gives you research to cite that the correlation was so strong that it could not have been random and could not have been by chance. So no other indicators have raised any warning flags. Therefore the author is suggesting that in an endeavor to use it as a potential means of predicting similar eruptions in future, researchers intend to collect more data. So the author at no point in the passage is putting down the hypothesis or of these researchers, or has found fault with their study. In fact, throughout the passage, the author actually seems hopeful, maybe seems looking forward to more data that can substantiate that this is a possible way of predicting volcanoes. So you would think that the author kind of feels hopeful, right? Feels generally positive, but not 100% sure, right? So hopeful and positive, but he's not 100% sure, he or she. So if you actually take a look at, imagine you had this sort of a spectrum of different attitudes in terms of how one would feel about the conclusions of a research study and a hypothesis. You can go from absolutely positive, this is 100% confident, no. The author is hopeful, yes. Skeptical, kind of like, hey, I think there's something off with the study, something more should be done because this doesn't, the author is not skeptical, and the author is definitely not dismissive either, right? So the author is not super confident, but neither is the author skeptical or dismissive about the study. So like we said, the author is hopeful and positive that, hey, this might work out. So now when you take a look at the answer choices, let's go through them one by one. Ambivalent. Well, ambivalent is used when someone has two contrasting opinions about something. They're not sure. Sometimes they feel, hey, this is better. Sometimes they feel that is better. So, the author is not ambivalent, right? The author is not like, hey, this is, this sounds like this could be true, but then that study said that this might actually be a coincidence. No, the author doesn't do that kind of a contrast and doesn't seem to vacillate between two options. So, cannot be ambivalent. Choice B is contemplative. Well, contemplative expresses a very thoughtful attitude, like you're thinking about something, pondering over it, trying to ruminate and arrive at some insight. So that's definitely not the attitude of the author either. Optimistic. Now that sounds likely, because optimistic is indeed the same as hopeful. So let's keep it safe and look at the next answer choice, which is pessimistic. Well, I'm sorry, that is definitely not okay, because it's the opposite of optimistic, and we know that the author is hopeful, so pessimistic is not correct. So that leaves us with the answer. The author's attitude towards tidal cycle being a strong indicator of certain types of volcanic activity can best be described as optimistic. So you should be able to plug the answer choice back into the question and just make sure that it reads fine, so you can be optimistic that you've chosen the right answer, maybe even confident, and then you can go on to the next question. And the last question type for today is the evidence-based reasoning question. Now here, you will have to identify a specific line from the passage that substantiates the answer to the previous question that you had just answered. This is kind of an interesting question type, so let's take a look at this. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So what was our previous question? Our previous question was a tone question, which was about the author's feeling or the attitude the author had towards the study, towards the belief that tidal cycles could potentially provide advanced warning, right? Advanced warnings of volcanic eruptions. So the tone that we had identified was hopeful, and the answer choice was optimistic. So you kind of have to make sure you go back to the previous question and you just, you can make sure that you have the right understanding. So it's good to do these two questions consecutively. And now we are given a whole bunch of answer choices. So we have to identify which one of these four options best supports the answer that we chose for the previous question, which is hopeful and optimistic. All right. Now each of these options is actually a line from the passage, right? You can see that they all start and end with double quotation signs. So these quotation marks mean that they have directly taken the choices from the passage. So now let's now here there's nothing much to locate because these choices are already from the passage. So if we want, we can go directly and look at the each of these options, but we will have to do it at the time of elimination because we have already anticipated that the answer choice has to substantiate the tone of hopeful or optimistic. Now let's begin to go through each answer choice. Choice A. The question of whether or not tidal forces can trigger eruptions is long-standing in the earth sciences despite a lot of research. Yes, so this particular choice refers to this sentence. The question or not whether tidal forces can trigger eruptions is long-standing. So a lot of research was done and they have not really gotten any conclusion on this yet. So, but this definitely has nothing to do with the particular thesis that the author is proposing right there at the beginning and the end, because and definitely this is not a hopeful tone anyway, this one. So this has nothing to do with why the author feels so optimistic. So A cannot be our answer, right? So this is not hopeful. B, choice B, researchers wanted to take a different angle with the study and look at whether there is some detectable signal associated with tidal forces that can tell us something about a volcano's activity. This is the immediate next sentence right here. This is where it's located in the passage. And again, these lines do not express a sense of positivity. It just says that the researchers wanted to take a different angle and explore this. So this is more of an open statement. This is kind of factual that says, hey, this is what they wanted to do. There is no hopeful tone here either. So this was not hopeful. So B is also not the correct answer. Now let's move on to choice C. They found that for most of those 12 years, there was no correlation between tremor and tidal cycles except in the few months before a steam-driven eruption in September 2007, when a strong correlation emerged. So this one is right in the last paragraph, right here. They found that for most of this time, there was no correlation except the few months before a steam-driven eruption, when a strong correlation emerged. Now, these lines, this is actually a very tempting choice because it does say that there was a strong correlation just 3 months before the eruption, right? So this is tempting, but these lines merely state the findings of the research, right? This is what the research came up with, but it does not convey or does not shed any light on how the author feels about the correlation that emerged. So this is kind of more of a factual tone, right? And and just says, hey, yes, there was a strong correlation. So this is very tempting. So let's hang on to this answer choice and then move to the last answer choice. D. While the fluctuations in seismic amplitude were subtle, the strength of the correlation to the tidal cycle was not. Strong statement. The correlation was as strong as 5 sigma, the researchers say, meaning that the probability that the pattern arose by chance is about 1 in 3.5 million. So this is picked up from the last paragraph right there. And these lines are actually quite interesting because these lines show that the results from the research conducted at the Ruapehu volcano had proved the correlation of tidal patterns. It was not a mere coincidence. So this was a proof, right? And the very fact that the author gives these numbers to tell you just how concrete and reliable this finding was, how you can use it to predict volcanic eruptions. So this establishes that relationship absolutely conclusively, and therefore this is more strong. This choice D is stronger and more optimistic and hopeful than choice C, which was more of findings and factuals. Now you can ask me, well, D is also a finding and a fact, because whatever is written in D is still arises from the findings of the research. But if you actually look at the first sentence, the author says here, while this was subtle, the strength of the correlation was not. It was it's an attempt to prove beyond doubt that this, my dear friends, is a beautiful correlation. It's absolutely reliable. You can bank on it. This is something that the author is so confident about, right? Because this is when they're establishing the fact that you can rely on it, you can trust it. And that is from where the hopefulness and the optimism arises, right? So between C and D, D is definitely the right answer choice. And C is a close one, but it's a trap because the test creators really want you to develop a sense of precision when you're choosing amongst two similar options, right? And you might encounter things like this in college. So you have to really have your antenna sharpened and ready to tackle these kinds of answer choices. So let's quickly recap the strategy that Galvanize Test Prep recommends for SAT reading questions. First, we skim through the passage. Then we understand the task that the question wants us to do. And then we locate the relevant portion from the passage. And we anticipate what the right answer could be without looking at the answer choices if we can. And finally, we eliminate the wrong options and then we plug the correct answer back into the question to make sure that it all adds up. So I hope this was a useful acronym, SULAE, S-U-L-A-E. And now we move on to a quick recap of the SAT reading question types. So today we looked at a main idea question, detail-based questions, inference questions, vocabulary in context questions, tone questions, and evidence-based reasoning questions. There's also another common question type on the SAT called the data reasoning questions, and these we will cover in our SAT online prep course. Another aspect I would like to draw your attention to is that on the SAT you can expect to get paired passages or pair passages in the sense that you would get two passages together that talk about the same topic, and a series of questions could be asked which expect you to synthesize these two passages and compare them. So they can be very, very interesting and somewhat challenging as well. And we will cover paired passages in our online SAT prep course. And speaking of online SAT prep, Galvanize Test Prep also offers online GRE prep, online TOEFL prep, and online IELTS prep. We also help with admissions counseling, where students can find the right perfect universities for them, and also help with college application essays and much, much more. Here's our contact information, our website, and our email address. And I would love to hear back from you because I would really like to know how you found this session today, what you liked, what you would like to see us do better, any other topics that you would like us to cover in future. So please do write to us and let us know how we can help you with your SAT and college application journey. This is Pavitra from Galvanize Test Prep signing off, and I really hope you enjoyed this day today. And this is Pavitra from Galvanize Test Prep. I had a great time doing this session, and I do hope to hear from you soon. So until then, take care.